Some people only need to send a single text, and it takes you the whole afternoon to calm yourself down. Some only need to glance your way, and you shrink back into the child you once were, and then you call it hurt. But the truth is, they didn't hurt you. You were controlled by your own reaction. You got pulled into a game you didn't even know you were playing, and you lost, simply because you responded. We are not weak because others are strong. We are weak when we unknowingly surrender our minds to others. Every time you lash out, demand fairness, or cry out to be understood, you lose a piece of your inner peace. A Stoic does not seek victory in the external world. They train to become untouchable from within through reason, emotional discipline, and awareness in the face of friction. And once you understand that, there will be no need to react. Now, begin at the origin of every reaction, your own mind. 1. Reaction is a signal of surrender. Have you ever walked away from a conversation with a heavy heart and a stream of if-only thoughts looping in your mind? If only I hadn't snapped. If only I had said less. If only I hadn't sent that message. The strange thing is, you already knew this the moment you reacted, but emotion won. You weren't led by reason, you were pulled by the urge to respond. And in that moment, however small, you gave away your power. We often think reacting is strength, a way to assert ourselves. But to a careful observer, emotional reaction is simply a subtle surrender. It's a quiet admission that the other person succeeded in shaking you even with just a look, a word, or a deliberate silence. And once you react, you're no longer the center. You become the consequence. I lived that way for years, easily triggered, quick to anger, sensitive to offense. Every time I told myself, I'm just protecting myself. But in truth, what I was defending was a fragile ego, obsessed with being right, being understood, being heard. That's not strength. That's dependence on someone else's emotion. Stoicism doesn't teach suppression. It teaches choice. Like a trained fighter who doesn't strike first, not because he's weak, but because he knows the most powerful counterstrike is needing none at all. Your calm confuses the provocateur. Not because you're silent, but because you're no longer ruled by the need to respond. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "When you are offended at any man's fault, turn to yourself and study your own failing." We can't stop others from saying hurtful things, but we can refuse to react, and that is real power. The untrained see reaction as instinct. The awakened see non-reaction as an art of living. It's not avoidance. It's not fear. It is deep freedom where you are no longer led by anger, fear, or wounded pride. You don't need silence to suppress. You need inner strength to see that some words aren't worth a reply. Some people don't deserve a second more in your mind. And when you stop, it's not because you're weak, but because you no longer need to prove anything. Not everyone who makes you react is stronger than you. They simply know where your unhealed wound is. And your reaction, that's the map showing them the way. Close that map. Stop reacting. Reclaim the controls. Because the moment you stop reacting, you're no longer someone else's pawn. You're the one holding the board. 2. No one controls you unless you give them permission. Some people don't need to raise their voice to unsettle you. They don't need to insult you or say anything cruel. A cold attitude, a distant look, or a prolonged silence is enough to leave you anxious, doubting, and spiraling in your own mind. But once the discomfort fades, you must ask yourself, why do they have that much power over how I feel? The answer isn't in them. It lies in where you carelessly placed your control outside of yourself. We often say, they hurt me. They made me angry. They made me feel small. But pause and ask, How could they make you feel that way if you hadn't allowed it? People can only enter your mind when you leave the door open. They can only manipulate you when you hand them the keys to your happiness. I used to believe that if I lived well enough, kind enough, patiently enough, others would change how they treated me. I thought if I stayed quiet, they'd understand. If I yielded, they'd appreciate me. But eventually, I realized I wasn't disappointed because they were unkind. I was disappointed because I handed over my emotional control to someone who never knew how to protect it. Epictetus once said, "Freedom is the only worthy goal in life. It is won by disregarding things that lie beyond our control." That doesn't mean you become emotionless. It means you gain the clarity to know what you control and what you must stop letting control you. Every action from others, a sharp comment, a cold shoulder, a rejection, is just data. Your reaction to that data defines who you are. Someone may be rude, but only you decide whether that rudeness enters your mind and becomes a wound. This world is full of people who will try to press your emotional buttons, not because they care about you, but because they feel powerful when you lose your footing. And if you don't train yourself, you'll react like a machine. They speak, you break. They're silent, you panic. They leave you collapse. But you are not a machine. You are the operator. And the first step is revoking access. Not everyone who enters your life gets access to your heart. Not everyone who speaks deserves a response. Not everyone who expresses disappointment does so out of love sometimes. It's just how they maintain control. The moment you stop doing everything to be understood, accepted, or validated, that's when you take back the wheel. You don't need to argue. You don't need to prove. You don't need to explain. You just need to walk away from the game with your mind intact. Because the truth is, no one controls you unless you hand over control. And the truly powerful person is not the one who silences others. It's the one who remains peaceful, even when the world is screaming to shake that peace. 3. Stillness isn't silence, it's inner power. Some think your silence means you have nothing to say. Some believe your restraint comes from weakness. Some see your retreat as defeat, but that's how they see the world through the lens of those who need noise to feel important. They don't understand. Stillness isn't empty. It is the space inhabited by someone who has mastered inner strength. I once sat in a meeting where someone tried to subtly demean me with sharp words in front of everyone. The room went silent, all eyes on me. They waited to see if I'd get angry, defend myself, or fire back with sarcasm, but I did none of that. I simply looked up, calm, and continued with my presentation as if nothing deserved my attention. And I realized that silence was loud. Not all silence is the same. There's the silence of the powerless. There's the silence of avoidance. And then there's the stillness of someone who has transcended the need to prove anything. A kind of stillness that isn't retreat, but command. Not fear, but choice. The untrained often confuse chaos with power. They believe the loudest voice controls the room, the fastest reaction wins. But that's only true when you don't understand that true strength doesn't need to display itself. It only needs to be present. And sometimes that presence is so quiet it unsettles the entire room. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." You only gain self-mastery when you stop getting dragged into unconscious reactions, when you no longer need to respond to prove your worth, and when you stop mistaking rage for courage. Your silence isn't because you have nothing to say. It's because you no longer need to say anything to be yourself. Stillness is a refined form of language. It's a graceful rejection of unworthy attacks, a quiet refusal to perform in plays you no longer wish to join. The final word in a conversation you walk away from to keep your clarity intact. And the strange thing is, your stillness makes others more uneasy than any outburst. They don't know what you're thinking. They can't predict your next move. They don't understand why you're not reacting. And in that space, they're forced to face themselves, which most people dread. When you react, you enter the game. When you're silent, you change the rules. When you're still not just quiet, but unshaken, you are no longer a player in the fight. You become the observer. And the observer always sees more than those blindly rushing into conflict. Stillness isn't the absence of feeling. It's feeling everything while staying grounded. You're not the wave. You are the calm water that reflects all things without breaking. And that makes you formidable, not because you dominate others, but because you are unmoved by them. Let others be loud. Let them speculate, provoke, interpret. You stay still as a form of sovereignty, because you know you don't need to speak much, prove anything, or beat anyone to hold your place. 4. Don't enter the game they've designed. Some people don't need authority to manipulate you. They don't command, impose, or control through force. They do it through a script. And the troubling part is most of us step into these scripts unconsciously. The manipulator doesn't need to shout to get attention. All they need is to play the victim just enough, act confused just enough, or appear kind just enough to seem reasonable. They construct a story in which they're always the lead, and you're cast as the villain if you don't behave according to their narrative. And the moment you start explaining, defending, or trying to please, you've stepped into their game. I've been there. In conversations I thought were about understanding each other, only to realize I'd been drawn into a carefully directed scene where I was made to feel guilty, responsible for their emotions, constantly proving I was enough. And the more I tried, the more they pushed the boundaries, because it wasn't a dialogue, it was a performance, and I was both the audience and the puppet. A Stoic knows not every battle is worth entering, and not every script deserves a reply. Epictetus once wrote, "When someone provokes you, it's not their action that rules you, it's your agreement to play by their rules." You didn't lose because you were weak. You lost because you got drawn into a setup you didn't create. Manipulators need co-actors. They need someone to explain, someone to apologize, someone to react so they can keep playing their part. But if you stay silent, don't respond, don't retaliate, don't engage, they're left in limbo. They don't know how to continue when no one's playing along. Imagine a stage, brightly lit. The lead actor steps out, ready to unload blame, insults, and emotional traps. But then they look around. The audience is gone. You're no longer sitting there. No reaction, no reply, no role. The lights are still on, but the performance has lost its meaning. You don't need to shout to prove you're not wrong. You don't need to stay to make them feel satisfied. You are not a character in someone else's play. You can walk away not out of fear, but because you refuse to be a prop in a dishonest script. Marcus Aurelius once reminded, "Don't waste your time arguing with those who only seek to pull you into their chaos. They're not looking for truth, they're looking for victory. And the more you respond, the more victorious they feel." The only way to break the game is to leave the board. Don't make the next move. Don't play the next part. Don't step onto a stage you never asked to be on. Because from the outside, you can see it clearly. You see the acting, the manipulation, what's real and what's not. And from that vantage point, you're no longer under their control. Power isn't always in the hands of the one running the game. Sometimes it belongs to the one who's awake enough to realize it's just a game and brave enough to walk away. 5. You don't need validation to have worth. Have you ever felt anxious just because someone didn't reply to a message? Rewritten a response over and over, just so they'd understand you correctly? Lost sleep because someone seemed distant or cold, even though they no longer mattered in your life? That's not love. That's a fixation on being validated. We grow up in a world that ties self-worth to how others respond. A compliment lifts us for a day. A cold glance leaves us restless. A single criticism makes us question ourselves. We don't live by inner value, we live by the distorted mirrors around us. And because of that, we become easy to control. I've been there doing everything to maintain a relationship that had already drained me, just because I feared being seen as someone who gave up. Staying in a conversation I knew was toxic, just because I wanted them to see me clearly. I didn't dare stay silent because I was afraid they'd think I was wrong. And I didn't realize I was defining my worth through someone else's unstable emotions. Marcus Aurelius once said, "Ambition is tying your peace to what others say or do." But he continued, "Awareness is tying your peace to your own actions." You cannot live peacefully if your confidence depends on someone else's eyes, words, or moods. You can't feel whole if every day you're checking whether others still like you, respect you, or understand you. And you cannot grow if you believe your real worth needs confirmation from someone outside you. People may praise you today and abandon you tomorrow. They may respect you when you're useful and drop you when you're not. They may love you with sweet words, then destroy you with calculated silence. You cannot build a foundation on something that's fickle. Recognition is a gift, not a prerequisite for self-worth. You don't need their agreement to know you're right. You don't need their apology to know you were hurt. You don't need their attention to know your voice matters. And you don't need their praise to know you are enough. The less you need to be understood, the more you understand yourself. The less you need to be seen, the more clearly you see yourself. The less you need validation, the closer you come to inner freedom. The real danger isn't others hurting you. It's you handing them the power to define your worth. And every time you do, you trade a piece of your soul for their opinion. Take back every piece you've sent out. Every hope that they'd understand. Every effort to please. Every time you stayed silent just to keep the peace. You don't need any of that to prove your worth. You've had worth all along simply by keeping your heart intact in a broken world. Your value doesn't come from someone recognizing it. It comes from not needing recognition to remain yourself. 6. Silence can be the strongest response. We often confuse silence with weakness. We think if we don't speak, we're surrendering. If we don't defend, we're being dismissed. If we don't fight back, we lose value. But there comes a time when you realize silence isn't the absence of words. It's the presence of power. I once attended a family gathering where a relative made a cutting joke in front of everyone. "Still single, huh? Must be too picky." Laughter followed. Eyes turned to me, waiting for a reaction, a clever comeback, a glare, a forced smile. But I just gave a faint smile and said nothing. I took a sip of water and turned back to my previous conversation as if the remark had never existed. In that moment, the room went quiet. Not because of what was said, but because of the stillness that followed. Silence, when placed with precision, is louder than any shout. It forces the offender to confront the emptiness behind their words. It throws off the ones who thrive on provocation. Because nothing confuses them more than your refusal to play the part they had prepared for you. Epictetus once said, If someone can make you angry, it's because you've agreed that it's worth getting angry over. And when you stay silent, it's not because you have nothing to say. It's because you've refused to hand over your emotions to someone else. Manipulators don't fear your rage. They fear your indifference. They don't fear your response. They fear that you no longer feel the need to respond. Because as long as you're still reacting, still clarifying, still seeking to be understood, you're still trapped in their game. But when you go silent, you've exited the board without saying a word, and that exit leaves them powerless. Silence is a response that can't be twisted. You leave no words to be misquoted, no statements to be reshaped, no material for others to spin the narrative their way. And in the world of manipulators, losing control of the narrative is their worst fear. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "The strong don't need to win arguments. They simply don't let their minds be dragged into unnecessary battles." That is what silence gives you, a noble refusal to descend into the chaos. Not every statement deserves a reply. Not every provocation merits a reaction. Not every insult requires explanation, because if you must prove your worth every time someone fails to see it, you'll speak forever and never feel enough. Let your silence be the final word. I have moved beyond the need to prove. I'm not responding not because I have nothing to say, but because I don't need to speak to stay true to who I am. 7. True freedom begins within. There is a kind of freedom that's easy to see. You move out, you quit your job, you block someone's number, you unfollow someone who once hurt you. But there is another kind of freedom far harder to grasp, the kind where that person still shows up in your mind, and you no longer feel anything. You can leave a city and still be bound by the memories that happened there. You can change your number and still hope for a message that never comes. You can tell everyone, "I'm fine now," but still feel your heart tremble at the mention of their name. That's when you understand. Freedom is not physical distance, it's emotional distance. I used to believe that cutting someone off was enough. But even after I cut ties, I still tormented myself. I still replayed every conversation in my head, imagined every what-if scenario, still secretly wished they would one day understand how deeply I'd been hurt. And then I realized I had stopped contacting them, but I was still imprisoning myself in a cage built by my own mind. Epictetus once wrote, "The truly free person is the one whose soul is not ruled by praise or by insult." If you're still wounded by words from the past, still needing someone to admit you were right, still aching for recognition, then you are not truly free. You've only stepped out of the prison, still dragging its invisible chains behind you. True freedom doesn't begin by avoiding the person who hurt you. It begins by confronting the dependency inside you. Freedom doesn't mean you're no longer hurt. It means you no longer need that pain to define who you are. There are people no longer in your life, yet still living in your thoughts each night. They don't need to control you because you still haven't taken back control of yourself. Every time you think of them with resentment, with a sense of injustice, with regret over an unfinished ending, you're giving away another piece of your inner freedom to someone who's been gone for a long time. Freedom is not about who walked away from you. It's about whether you still live for them. You don't need an apology to heal. You don't need acknowledgement to know you were innocent. You don't need one last conversation to close the chapter. All you need is a decision. To stop letting them live in your mind as the main character. Marcus Aurelius once said, "You can cut through all confusion instantly with the right decision." And sometimes that right decision is to let go. Not letting go of them, but letting go of the part of you that still longs to be understood, validated, or to fix the past. True freedom doesn't come from the outside. It doesn't depend on how others treat you. It comes from the moment you no longer let that treatment control you. You'll know you're truly free when the person who once hurt you shows up in your mind not as a wound, but as a name. When you no longer need to think of them, forgive them, or triumph over them. You simply live on without carrying them into your next chapter. And that is the kind of freedom no one can ever take from you because it comes from the deepest place only you can touch, within. 8. Silent evolution is the loudest response. Nothing quiets someone who once belittled you more than realizing you've moved on without them. No need for arguments, no declarations, no loud affirmations. Just you, quietly rising beyond their reach. Loud revenge only makes you resemble them. But silent change, no bragging, no mentions, no performance is the kind of response that leaves others with nothing to do but observe and fall silent. I used to think I needed an apology to begin again. Needed acknowledgement to end what never fully closed. Needed a chance to hear, what if? But I came to understand some things don't need to be proven through words. Some lives only need to be proven by how you live on. You don't need a status update to show you're okay. Don't need to post a picture to prove you're doing well. Don't need to send a final message to close an unfinished chapter. Evolution doesn't need an audience. It only needs you. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "Don't waste time explaining. People only understand what they're ready to understand." And most of those who once hurt you, they didn't misunderstand. They never intended to understand. So, you owe them no explanation. The only thing you owe yourself is to rise and keep living with more depth, more discipline, and more peace. Think of the person who made you doubt yourself. They planted the idea that you weren't good enough, attractive enough, capable enough, or worthy of love. And you believed them. You bent yourself trying to fit their mold. But now, you see you don't need fixing. You just needed to step out of their frame. Your silence now is not passivity. It's an intentional choice. You're investing in your strength, your peace, your inner growth. Every day you move forward without looking back. Every morning you stop checking whether they still care. Every time you focus on your life instead of your past, that is you evolving, quietly but steadily. And they, if they ever gain a flicker of awareness, will recognize that. But by then, they'll no longer have the power to break you, because you will no longer stand in places that can be broken. Not because you've built higher walls, but because you've built a stronger self. You don't retaliate, you don't explain, you don't prove, you evolve. And that evolution that is the loudest voice of all. 9. Emotional reaction is a precious currency. Don't spend it on the unworthy. In a world where everyone fights for attention, your reaction is a form of currency. Every time you get angry, anxious, hurt, defensive, or feel the urge to explain, you're spending a piece of your emotional energy. And tragically, we often overspend it on people who never deserved it. Have you ever felt drained after a conversation with someone? Not because it was long, but because you poured too much feeling into it. You strained to be understood, to defend your truth, to fix what they deliberately distorted. Yet no matter what you did, they didn't listen, didn't respect, didn't stop, and you walked away empty, not because you were wrong, but because you spent all your emotional wealth on a game that was never worth playing. Manipulators don't need your love, they just need your reaction. A flicker of anger validates their influence. A sign of hurt confirms their victimhood. One line of defense gives them fuel to keep the play going. And every time you speak, you're feeding the fire they lit. Epictetus once said, "He who angers you, conquers you." Not because they're right, but because they made you give up a part of your power you could have kept. They hold no weapons, only provocation. And when you react, you hand them the sword. Here's a hard truth. People unworthy of your energy can still drain it if you don't draw a line. Don't confuse silence with defeat. Don't assume non-reaction means weakness. Sometimes, refusing to respond to toxic behavior isn't because you don't care, but because you value your peace more than winning a small war. Just like you wouldn't open your wallet for every shiny object on the street. Learn to withhold your emotional response for things and people truly worth it. A judgment from someone who's never lived your life isn't worth a sleepless night. A snide remark from someone too afraid to live honestly isn't worth a reply. A cryptic message from someone who once broke you isn't worth a single word. The more you control your reactions, the more you preserve your autonomy. And in that autonomy lies your dignity, your clarity, your strength. Things no one can take from you unless you hand them over. Think of your emotional energy as an investment. Don't let it fall into the hands of those who only deplete, never build. Don't let their presence, whether a message, a look, or a memory, be bought with the price of your inner disturbance. You can't control what others do, but you can absolutely control what reaches your mind. And once you choose to reserve your emotions for things of real value, you'll find you're not just saving energy. You're rebuilding your inner stability day by day. 10. Non-reaction is the highest form of strength. True strength makes no noise. It doesn't need explosions, victories, or applause. It only needs you steady as stone in the storm, calm as the sea in the eye of the hurricane. We grow up in a culture that glorifies resistance. Speak up, fight back, demand justice. But few teach you this. Some battles are won by not fighting. Some attacks lose their power the moment you refuse to receive them. And some silences hit the hardest. Non-reaction is not weakness. It is a deliberate choice. It is how you say, "I will not allow you to drag me down to the frequency of your chaos." It's how you step away from conflict, not because you can't win, but because that victory isn't worth the cost of your peace. I used to think I was strongest when I could answer sharply, counter intelligently, or silence my opponent with words. But I realized the satisfaction of winning an argument is fleeting, while the consequences of a single loss of control can last weeks, even years. Epictetus once said, "No one can upset you unless you allow them to." And refusing to react is how you revoke that permission. You are not silent because you have nothing to say. You are silent because you have risen above the need to be understood, to be right, to win. Those who lack self-mastery often confuse reaction with power. They believe the loudest voice has control. But the loudest person in the room isn't the one shouting, it's the one who remains composed while everything else falls apart. When you don't react, you don't play a role. You don't fall into the manipulator's trap. You don't enable the cycle of toxic dynamics. You break the loop. And the person who once thrived on your instability begins to lose their grip because there's nothing left to hold on to. Non-reaction doesn't mean you don't feel. It means you feel deeply and still choose calm. It is maturity in its purest form. It's when you master your anger without suppressing it. When you protect your heart without needing to defend it aloud. In a noisy world, where everyone's trying to speak louder than the rest, the one who chooses silence consciously is the most formidable. Not because they're hiding something, but because they no longer need the things others consider essential. Words, arguments, victory. They've stepped out of the game, and when there's no one left to defeat, the aggressor has no reason to exist. Non-reaction is not the end. It's the silent declaration that I no longer play this game. My mind is no longer led astray. I have stepped out of the storm and I stand firm in the peace I've built. I no longer believe in freedom coming from one final conversation, a belated apology, or a chance to clear things up. The only thing that has truly freed me is the moment I chose not to react, not needing to prove I was right, not needing to reclaim justice, not needing to respond to any words crafted to provoke. Non-reaction didn't come to me overnight. It came after exhaustion from trying to explain, after sleepless nights caused by careless remarks, after letting others determine my worth. But I've learned this. You can't reclaim control of your life if you keep letting others control your emotions. And from the moment I chose to reserve my reactions for what truly matters, I didn't just find peace, I found myself again. If these words awaken something in you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you won't miss upcoming content on philosophy, self-mastery, and the journey of personal growth. And always remember, when you no longer need to speak to assert yourself, that's when you are at your strongest. I'll see you in the next video.